Jupiter and Saturn combinations. This is a combination we have to be a little more conscientious and cautious about because it's really not one of the easier combinations to have. So what I've got here is I've got the description of Saturn starving Jupiter from the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2. We're going to go through that, and if you have this combination, please try to listen with an open mind, because I know it's not an easy combination. And it's just like with the Saturn-Sun combination or the Rahu-Sun combination, it's really hard to get a point across to someone when you're saying the only reason you do something is because you're coming at it from a deep sense of lack, and you're just trying to prove how good you are, but really you don't feel so good inside. That doesn't really work real well when you're talking to people about that kind of a thing. But with astrology, that's why we have astrology, is to understand a person's motivations. And the reason I want to be extra cautious and conscientious about this combination, Jupiter and Saturn, is because this is one of those combinations that tends to, or has the possibility, if all other factors support it, to give a bit of a fanatical, fundamentalist approach to things. And that's hard, because number one, you can't tell someone that they're a fanatic or a fundamentalist because they don't think they are, right? Maybe some of them do. But number two, we have to share the information in such a way that maybe we'll get them thinking about, well, what are my real motivations here? So what we're going to discuss with this Saturn and Jupiter combination are simply possibilities. It may be true, may not be true for you, but just think about it a little bit. So why is Saturn and Jupiter together a bit of a difficult combination? There are some positives. We'll get to that too. But let's start with the difficulties. Well, number one, Jupiter is our capacity to experience joy, positivity, optimism, openness within life. To be able to meet someone and be jovial and just appreciate that you're talking to someone. You're forgiving of them and of all their flaws. You're not judgmental of them. Jupiter is not at all a judgmental planet. He's never a judgmental planet. So no matter what dignity he's in, he's not a judgmental planet. He may be influenced by others, which cause him to appear that way. But the essence of Jupiter is to be open and loving and supportive to all. That's why Jupiter is an enemy to no other planet, right? So when Jupiter represents our happiness and our sense of purpose, and it's well supported, we naturally feel that. No matter who we are, what we're doing, what we failed to do, what we've accomplished, we just have this natural sense of joy and purpose. Now, if we take Saturn, the planet of lack, of diminishment, of failure, of psychological complexes, of fear, of not feeling good enough, of being a slave, and we put that with Jupiter, the person has an extreme difficulty feeling that deep sense of fulfillment and happiness from Jupiter, because all they can see are the problems of Saturn, which is one of the reasons why this can tend to give one a bit of a fanatical or fundamentalist personality in the negative sense, that they become the way they are because deep down inside, what they believe, what they know, they don't really trust it. They don't really feel they know it. And so they go on that rampage of trying to prove it to other people to make themselves feel better. In the same way that when we get these Christian missionaries who want to go out and share the love of Jesus with everybody, oftentimes they're not doing it because they have this deep love in their heart and they want to support the world. They're doing it because they're not quite sure about their own beliefs and their own religions, and they think that if they can get someone else to believe them, the more people that believe what they believe, the better off they feel about themselves. So it's not a sattvic reason. It's coming from more of a sense of, again, a psychological complex Saturn and a deep sense of lack. And they're trying to prove their purpose, their philosophy, by getting more people to believe what they believe. So with Jupiter and Saturn, it's other things being supported. This can create an individual who doesn't really have a sense of faith or purpose, but they can act like it. They can overcompensate like you would not believe and make you think that they are, the most knowing, knowledgeable person in the world. But if you put them in the room with someone who doesn't believe what they believe, or if you put them in the room with someone who thinks a little bit differently from them, you'll see the truth come out. Because the real Jupiter, when he's in his essence strong and clear, he can be in the room with 20 people who believe 20 different things, and he could care less. He's just there to be happy with them. He could believe in Jesus. He could believe in Shiva. He could believe in, the giant spaghetti space monster. And he doesn't need to prove it to other people because he's secure in his own faith, in his own knowledge, in his own understanding, in his own purpose, that he doesn't need the validation from others. That's really what it comes down to, is the sense of validation. So let's go ahead and return to this Saturn starving Jupiter Avashta on page 142 of The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2. So with this Avashta, with this combination, we need to take note of the fact of what house is this falling in. While the person will often have the kinds of characteristics we're describing generally just by having Jupiter and Saturn together, it's going to be more supported it's going to show up more in the area of life represented by the house in which this combination occurs. So we'll see a person having a lack of faith, difficulty finding purpose, a lack of hope in finding true knowledge in that area. Whatever area it's falling in, it will typically rob a person of a sense of joy there. If it falls in the second house of resources, no matter what, the person's always going to feel like they just don't have enough. If it falls in the seventh house, no matter what, they're just always going to feel a sense of lack, like I'm never going to be fulfilled in my relationships. Now you work with that. We're not just saying you're doomed. You become aware of that influence, and then you undertake some kind of therapeutic measure to work through that belief system that you have. So what does this mean? It means the person needs to develop inwardly that area of life. So relationships, they need to develop a trust, a belief, and faith within themselves. Finances, they need to develop a psychological well-being, knowing that there are ups and downs in the world, and that you cannot define yourself by your wealth. Having this Avashta can make it particularly hard to counsel someone in the particular area, but also just in general. Because Jupiter is our capacity to hear and to know wisdom. And when it's afflicted by an extremely strong Saturn with a high Shadbala, really strong dignity, maybe even a Yuva Avashta, the person just cannot hear from other people good things, supportive things. They're always focused on the negative, or all they can see is what's wrong with what the other person is saying. So you get in discussion with an astrologer with this combination, and whoa, watch out. You're going to find the person has really strong beliefs about things, cannot typically see other people's points of view, and will do all that they can to kind of really prove their own particular point. That's it. That's only if that's all you have with this combination. There's going to be other things in the chart which could supersede that. But it's not necessarily always easy to talk wisdom-related things with an individual with Saturn, Jupiter combinations. So, as I mentioned, this gives a fanatical mentality that tries too hard to find fulfillment. They latch onto a belief, a dogma, a tradition, and they say, this is what's going to fulfill me. And that's why they're so forceful about it. That's why they can't hear other people's points of views, right? Because if they hear another person's points of views, it shakes this thing that they're trying to feel so secure about. And in the forceful act of trying to find happiness through this fanatical approach, they end up destroying or crushing the possibility of reaching that goal. It's again like the idea of trying to force a rose to grow. The more you force it, the more you kill it. So it's not easy at all. So we also have to have compassion when we have this for ourselves and for people who have this combination. Jupiter represents our creativity. And Saturn stifles that creativity, making it hard for one to feel inspiration and to try innovative things, to try new things. They're often locked into a definition of how the past was right. And if only we could return to that mythical golden age, which, if you've ever really paid attention to the news or how people think, it doesn't matter what time period you're in. Everyone's going to think the world's about to end and it was better 20 or 30 years ago. With the recent elections that we had, a lot of people were let down by that. And I just happened to be going through an old Krishnamurti video, and that was back in, the 80s or late 70s, early 80s. And people were asking the same questions. In the current state of the world with the political difficulties and the elite class, went on and on. I realized at that point in time, okay, reaffirmation here, that doesn't matter where you are, you're always going to think that the world is in a shitstorm most of the time. And with Saturn-Jupiter combinations, you'll think that it's in a shitstorm all the time, basically. Saturn and Jupiter can give a bit of depression because the person won't think there's really any point in trying, or they'll waste their time in useless activities. They won't really have the discernment to know what's the wise choice of action to take. A Jupiter starred by Saturn has a hard time thinking that there's really any point in doing anything new or innovative. All right. Now that's what we're going to find with the difficulty of Saturn influencing Jupiter. But this Jupiter will be delighting Saturn. So Jupiter's getting hurt, but Jupiter is helping Saturn. So if Saturn happens to be your ascendant lord or the lord of a trinal house or this sort of a thing, or your Atmakarika, well, Jupiter is going to help that Saturn to deal with problems. So it will be good going in that direction. Positively, this can make a person very skilled in organizational tasks. It can give them a great mind for the letter of the law. They'll make good judges. Not necessarily progressive judges in line with their times, but good judges of what has come before to keep the tradition that has always been there. It'll give an attraction to occupations of authority. Some would say it makes a good psychological counselor, but I don't necessarily think that's true. There would need to be some other things involved. It could make a good psychological counselor because the person would understand the suffering of Saturn more greatly, but there would have to be other things to support that. It makes a person strong in their capacity for debate. But again, negatively, it can make a person prone to being stubborn, having bigoted opinions, and tend to be too pessimistic. So if you read, The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2, or you happen to have Beneath the Vedic Sky by William Levesey, you'll see a lot of these things coming out. But it's not an easy combination. But remember, whatever house that Saturn rules, Jupiter will be helping to support that Saturn in its manifestation of that house. So Jupiter will be helping Saturn. But overall, we have to be very conscientious of this combination because more often than not, I've seen most of the time the negative come out with this combination. And it does require a person to turn more within, to really ask themselves the hard questions about what are my motivations? What do I really believe? Am I really happy? Is this really true? And that's not an easy thing. So we need to have compassion for ourselves if we have this. We need to have compassion for others if they have it. And, sometimes people will respond to these videos and say, well, that was awful negative. Well, sometimes in life things are negative. I mean, if you get your hand chopped off, that sucks, all right? You can't put a positive spin on that. And if you can, well, good for you. But sometimes things are just shitty. And sometimes combinations are going to be that way too. And rather than trying to gloss over them and say, well, here's all the positive, and then miss the fact that it's mostly negative, you're really doing a disservice to yourself. So this is not to say you're completely out of luck if you've got this combination, because you're not. You have 5 to 7 other planets, depending on which ones you count as planets or not, doing things within your chart. This is just one little aspect. And sometimes we have people whose personalities have problems. That's just a fact of life. The more we can accept that, the more we can look at it realistically. And that's the other thing about Saturn and Jupiter. They don't want to look at things realistically. They can't look at things realistically. They have a real hard time with it. But if they can train themselves to do it, they'll make a lot of progress in this life. They'll make a lot of personal, mental, emotional, spiritual growth in this life. Someone with a Jupiter-Saturn combination, I would probably highly recommend to study the works of Krishnamurti. You've heard me talk about Ramana Maharshi, Yogananda, The Presence Process, Michael Brown. But for a Jupiter-Saturn combination, Krishnamurti's approach is probably one of the most accurate approaches for you, Jiddu Krishnamurti's. But of course, most people who have Jupiter Saturn won't necessarily take to Jiddu Krishnamurti's approach because he's very much against this authoritarian idea, and he's very against tradition, which Jupiter and Saturn often wants to promote at all costs. So there are some positives, but for this combination, we need to be very gentle with, essentially. Take our time exploring it and understanding it within ourselves and others.